Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are not just doing a history lesson.
No, not at all.
We're basically unpacking the origin story of modern India.
That's a great way to put it.
We're going to look at how a nation that was just completely depleted, drained by 2 centuries of colonial rule, decided to stand up,
Right.
dust itself off, and then try to rebuild its entire economic engine from scratch.
It's an incredible story.
It is. It's a story of audacity, of these massive, massive experiments, and frankly, some very controversial choices.
It really is a fascinating period. We're focusing specifically on the years between 1950 and 1990.
A big 40 years.
Exactly.
Oh.
This is the era of the 5-year plans, the Green Revolution, and of course the infamous license raj.
Oh, yeah.
It's the story of big dreams, huge challenges, and the structural foundation of the India that we all live in today.
Absolutely. And before we jump into this time machine, I just have to break the fourth wall for a second and talk to our amazing community.
Please do.
To everyone on YouTube and our listeners tuning in, we are Simplified UPSC by PPP, and our whole mission is to make these heavy, dense textbooks feel light as a feather.
Make them digestible.
Exactly. So if you're getting value from these deep dives, please do us a massive favor and just smash that like button.
It really, really helps the algorithm find other learners just like you.
It does. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. It helps support our mission of decoding these complex texts into something you can actually use.
And, we have to give a huge shout out to our existing supporters.
A massive shout out.
You are the reason we can keep the lights on and keep digging through these dense reports. Your support honestly makes all this research possible.
It really does. And for those of you who are capable and want to help us keep this content coming, please do check out our Patreon. But hey, even if you just share this with a friend.
That means the world to us.
It really does. Also, a quick reminder, don't forget to check the comment section and our Telegram channel. We've got free notes and a breakdown of the previous year questions, the PYQs, all related to today's topic, waiting for you there.
And for the really serious learners out there who want everything organized in one place, we're talking detailed notes, extra PYQs, and model mains answers.
The full package.
The full package. You can join the private library. Just DM us on the public Telegram channel to get access.
All right, housekeeping is done. Let's get into the meat of it. We are diving deep, deep, deep into the NCERT Class 11 Economics, Chapter 2, Indian Economy, 1950-1990.
This chapter is so crucial. In our last deep dive, we looked at the economy on the eve of independence, and it was a mess.
A mess is putting it lightly. Stagnant.
Completely stagnant. Agricultural productivity was abysmal, and the industrial sector was barely even there. So the question facing the leadership in 1947 was, it was existential.
It was. What now?
What now, exactly?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've got a country that's finally free, finally the master of its own destiny. But that destiny looks a bit bleak, economically speaking. You have to decide on a system. It's like standing at a buffet with an empty plate, but then you realize there's no food in the trays.
Oh, I like that.
You have to go back to the kitchen and cook it all yourself. So do you run that kitchen like a capitalist enterprise, or do you run it like a socialist collective?
That is a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And the leaders of independent India, especially Jawaharlal Nehru, were grappling with exactly this binary choice.
Capitalism versus socialism.
Right. On one side, you have the capitalist model. In a pure capitalist system, it's all about the market forces.
Supply and demand.
Supply and demand decide everything. What to produce, how to produce it, and crucially, for whom to produce.
Right, and the big argument for capitalism is always efficiency, isn't it? If people want shoes, someone will figure out how to make shoes to make a profit. Simple.
Simple in theory. But there was a glaring, massive problem with applying that model to 1947 India.
What was it?
The problem is that capitalism operates on purchasing power. It assumes the consumer has money to signal their demand.
Right. No money, no vote.
Exactly. In 1947, India, the vast, vast majority of the population was living in abject poverty. They didn't have the money to buy the absolute basics of life, healthcare, education, even enough food.
So if you just left it all to the market?
The market would completely ignore the poor, because the poor aren't profitable customers.
So you'd get luxury cars for the few rich Maharajas and industrialists, but nobody would build low-cost housing or rural clinics because there's just no profit margin there.
Precisely. It would become a system for the top 1%, and the other 99% would be left behind.
Which was unacceptable for a new nation born out of a freedom struggle.
Absolutely. So Nehru and the Planning Committee looked at the alternative. socialism.
Mm.
And Nehru was intellectually very attracted to socialism.
He looked at the Soviet Union, right?
Yeah, he did. He looked at what the Soviet Union did in the 1930s and 40s. They took a backward, agrarian economy and just industrialized it at a breakneck pace.
And in a pure socialist system?
The government decides everything. There's no private property. The state owns all the factories, all the farms, and it distributes resources based on need, not your ability to pay.
But, and this is a big but, Nehru was also a Democrat.
A diehard Democrat.
He had just fought a freedom struggle based on individual rights and liberty. And the Soviet model, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly big on individual liberties.
Not at all. You can't just seize everyone's land and property in a democracy without causing a civil war or, losing the next election.
Right. So the Soviet model involved a level of authoritarian control that was just completely incompatible with the democratic constitution India was in the middle of writing.
So they were stuck. They were really stuck.
Yeah.
Capitalism would neglect the poor. Strict socialism would crush democracy and private property.
So they did what India often does so well. They improvised a middle path. They didn't choose A or B. They went for C.
And we call it the mixed economy.
The mixed economy.
The idea was pretty clever. The government, the state, would control the commanding heights of the economy.
What does that mean, commanding heights?
It means the heavy industries, the essential services. Things like steel, power, defense, railways, all the stuff you need to build a nation, but which requires massive amounts of capital and might not be immediately profitable.
Okay, so the state handles the big foundational stuff. What about the private sector? Were they just shut out completely?
Not entirely. The private sector would be encouraged to operate, but, and this is key, in a complementary role.
A supporting actor.
Exactly. They could run consumer goods industries, small businesses, trade, but it was all within a very strict framework of rules and regulations to make sure they serve the national interest.
So they were allowed to exist, but they were not allowed to drive the bus.
You've got it. The government was driving the bus, deciding the route and the speed, but private passengers were allowed on board as long as they behaved and, bought a ticket.
I like that. It's like a guided democracy for money.
And that brings us to the engine of this new system, the Planning Commission. It was set up in 1950, directly under the Prime Minister, who was the chairperson.
And the strategy was to use these 5-year plans to guide the entire economy.
Right. And we have to talk about the man behind the curtain here. The text highlights a very specific name, a statistician named Prasanta Chandra Mahalanobis.
P.C. Mahalanobis. Now that's interesting. Why a statistician? Why not a banker or a big businessman?
That's a fantastic question. P.C. Mahalanobis is a titan in Indian history. He founded the Indian Statistical Institute, the ISI.
Okay.
The logic was, if you're going to plan an entire economy centrally, you need data. You need numbers. You need to know exactly how much steel you have, how much grain you need, what the population growth is.
You can't plan in the dark.
No. Mahalanobis believed that statistics could basically predict and control the future.
And he was the architect of the second 5-year plan, wasn't he?
Yes. The second plan is really where this entire strategy solidified. Mahalanobis argued that for India to truly grow, it needed to build its own heavy industries. We're talking about capital goods.
Okay, let's clarify that for everyone listening. Capital goods versus consumer goods.
It's a simple but crucial distinction. Consumer goods are the things you and I buy. Shirts, radios, shoes.
The end product.
The end product. Capital goods are the machines that make the shirts, radios, and shoes.
Ah, okay. The machines that make the machines.
Mahalanobis argued that if India just made shirts, but we had to import all the sewing machines from Britain, we would never be truly independent or self-reliant.
We'd always be dependent on them for the technology.
Always. We needed to build the machine-making machines ourselves.
It's the difference between buying a fish and building your own fishing rod factory.
Exactly. He wanted the factory. So these 5-year plans, they weren't just random wish lists. They were structured very carefully around 4 major goals. The text calls them the pillars of the planning era.
Let's list them.
Growth, modernization, self-reliance, and equity.
Okay, let's break these down one by one, because this is basically the rubric we're going to use to grade the economy's performance later on.
Let's do it. Let's start with growth. This seems the most obvious one.
Yeah, bigger is better.
It is. Growth refers to an increase in the country's capacity to produce the output of goods and services. And the text uses a classic analogy here.
The cake.
The cake analogy.
I love the cake analogy. It's so simple. GDP, gross domestic product, is the cake. If the cake is small, it doesn't matter how you slice it, everyone is going to go hungry.
Right.
So growth means baking a bigger cake so that theoretically everyone can have a larger slice.
Theoretically, yes. And for a country coming out of total stagnation, simply increasing the volume of economic activity was priority number one.
You have to get the flywheel spinning.
You do, but a bigger cake isn't enough if you're using 19th century ovens to bake it. And that leads to the second goal, modernization.
Now, usually when people hear modernization, they just think of technology. New tractors, computers, automated assembly lines.
And that's part of it, for sure.
But the text makes a very, very interesting point here. That modernization in the Indian context was also social.
That is a vital distinction. It's so important. The planners recognized that you cannot have a modern economy with a feudal society. It just doesn't work.
The two are incompatible.
Exactly. So modernization meant adopting new technology to increase productivity, yes. But it also explicitly meant changes in social outlook.
Like what?
Like recognizing that women should have the same rights as men.
That's huge. That's not just about economics.
No, it's about a modern mindset, not just modern gadgets. If you have high-tech factories but you refuse to hire women, or you're stuck in these rigid caste-based labor divisions, you are not truly modernized.
You're just using new tools to enforce old prejudices.
Perfectly put. Then we have the third goal, self-reliance.
This feels almost emotional.
It was a massive psychological and strategic necessity for the first 7 plans, from 1950 to 1990. I mean, you have to remember, India had just spent 200 years being exploited by a foreign power.
There was a deep, deep fear of depending on other nations again.
A visceral fear, especially for things like food and critical technology. The whole idea was to avoid imports of goods that could be produced domestically.
It's that make in India spirit, but like from the 1950s.
Yeah.
And strictly enforced.
Very strictly enforced. We did not want foreign interference in our policies just because we owed them money or because we needed their wheat to feed our people.
Which makes sense. And finally, the fourth goal. The one that acts as the moral compass for the other 3.
Equity.
Equity. This is the check on the whole system.
And it is.
You can bake a huge cake, that's growth. You can use the best ovens, that's modernization. And you can bake it all by yourself without foreign help, self-reliance. But if 90% of that cake is eaten by the top 1% of the population and everyone else starves,
then the system has failed.
Completely.
It's a failure.
Exactly. Equity is all about ensuring that the benefits of economic prosperity actually reach the poor sections of society. It's about reducing the disparity in wealth.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? The text alludes to this. These goals, they don't always play nice together.
They fight each other. They often do.
That's the conflict. Give me an example.
Okay, so modernization often means using new technology, right?
Right. A new machine.
A new machine. And that new technology is often labor-saving. That machine can do the work of 10 people. So you might increase growth and modernization.
But you've just put 10 people out of a job.
Which hurts equity by increasing unemployment.
So the planners were constantly walking this tightrope. How do we modernize without leaving millions and millions of people behind?
That tension, that constant balancing act, it defines the entire 1950 to 1990 period. Okay, so keeping these 4 goals in mind growth, modernization, self-reliance, equity, let's look at the first major battleground for these ideas.
Agriculture.
Agriculture. This was the biggest headache, wasn't it?
Oh, it was a catastrophe. In 1947, the agricultural sector was a complete disaster. We had this colonial legacy of the Zamindari system.
The Zamindaris. Okay, for anyone who skipped history class, who are these guys?
They were essentially intermediaries, landlords. They would collect rent from the actual farmers, the tillers of the soil on behalf of the British, or just for themselves.
But they didn't actually invest in the land?
Not a single rupee. They were just rent seekers. They extracted wealth. They didn't create it.
And because the tiller, the actual farmer, didn't own the land.
They had no incentive to invest either. Why would you build a well or buy better seeds if the Zamindar's just going to come along, hike your rent, and take all the profit?
So no one invested.
No one. And the result was that productivity was incredibly low. We were actually importing food from the USA.
That must have been seen as a national humiliation.
It was. I think people forget how bad it was. We were living ship to mouth, literally waiting for ships from America to dock so we could eat.
That's a terrifyingly vulnerable position for a new country.
Yes, it was under the PL 480 program. So the government knew they had to do something, and they launched a 2-pronged attack. Solution number one was focused squarely on equity.
Land reforms.
Land reforms.
The slogan was land to the tiller. And the economic logic is just so sound, right?
Perfect.
If you own the land you're working, you'll work harder and you'll invest in it because you get to keep the profit. Ownership creates incentive.
So the first thing they did was pass laws to abolish the intermediaries, get rid of the zamindars, and bring the farmers into direct contact with the government.
And this part was actually largely successful, wasn't it?
It was. Millions of tenants became owners of the land they tilled. It broke the back of the old feudal structure in many, many places.
But that was only part one of land reforms. The second part.
The second part was land sealing. This was a different story.
Land sealing. So this basically meant capping the maximum amount of land that one person could own.
Right. If you owned more than the legal limit, the government would take the surplus land and give it to the landless laborers.
Sounds great on paper. Very Robin Hood.
Very Robin Hood. But in reality, the big landlords were powerful. They had money, political connections, and lawyers. The text points out that they immediately challenged the legislation and the courts, delaying implementation for years and years.
And while it was delayed, they found loopholes.
Massive loopholes. The classic one was the Benami transaction.
What's that?
They would register the land in the names of their close relatives, distant relatives, maybe even their servants or their drivers, just to escape the sealing.
So on paper, it looked like the land was distributed among 10 different people.
But in reality, the same powerful guy controlled it all.
It's essentially money laundering, but with dirt.
That is a brilliant way to describe it. Precisely. Now, there were exceptions. The text highlights Kerala and West Bengal as success stories. In those states, the governments were ideologically very committed to land reform, and the implementation was much, much stricter. But generally, across India, the Land Sealing Act had pretty limited success because of these loopholes and a general lack of political will.
Okay, so land reforms helped with equity to some extent, but we still needed more food. We were still hungry.
Still importing.
That brings us to solution number 2, which was focused on growth and modernization.
The Green Revolution.
This is the moment India stopped begging for food.
It is. The Green Revolution refers to the introduction of high-yielding variety, or HYV, seeds, particularly for wheat and rice.
But these weren't magic seeds.
No. They were a bit like high-performance sports cars.
How so?
You can't just put regular gas in them and expect them to work. They were needy.
Okay.
They didn't just grow with sunshine and prayer. They needed reliable irrigation. Lots and lots of water-specific amounts of chemical fertilizers and pesticides.
And if you didn't have all that?
If you didn't have the water or the chemicals, the seeds would actually perform worse than the old traditional seeds.
So it was a high-risk, high-reward situation.
Very much so. And this created a divide. The text breaks it down into 2 phases. Phase 1 was from the mid-60s to the mid-70s.
And because you needed money for fertilizers and reliable water, where did it take off?
It was restricted to the affluent states, Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and it was mostly wheat.
So wait, initially the Green Revolution actually increased inequality?
Temporarily, yes. The gap between the rich farmers in Punjab and the poor farmers in, say, Bihar, it widened.
But then came phase 2.
Then came phase 2, from the mid-70s to the mid-80s. The technology started to spread to more states and more crops.
And the result of all this?
We hit the self-reliance goal. India became self-sufficient in food grains. We could finally say goodbye to food imports.
That is a massive achievement for a country that had suffered from devastating famines just a few decades prior.
It is a game changer. But it sparked a debate that we are literally still having today.
Subsidies.
Subsidies. To get farmers to use these new, expensive seeds and fertilizers, the government had to offer subsidies. They had to make it cheap enough for a risk-averse farmer to even try.
So the question is, should those subsidies continue forever?
That's the one. And the text presents a really balanced view of this debate.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate. What's the argument against the subsidies?
The economists against subsidies, they argue that subsidies should be temporary. They say, look, the technology is profitable now. Farmers in Punjab and Haryana are making good money.
The training wheels should come off?
Exactly. The subsidies were meant to encourage adoption. Adoption has happened. Now stop the handouts. It's a huge burden on the government's budget, and it distorts prices.
And that leads to overuse of resources.
Like water and fertilizer. If you give free water and electricity, people will waste water, and we are seeing the environmental impact of that today.
Fair point. A very strong point. But what's the argument for keeping them?
The counter-argument is that farming in India is still incredibly risky. Most farmers are not rich. They're smallholders.
One bad monsoon and they're wiped out.
Exactly. So if you cut the subsidies, They can't afford the inputs. If they can't afford the inputs, production crashes, and our national food security is threatened. The argument is that food security is a strategic necessity, not just a business.
So the government has a responsibility to support it.
To ensure the poor can afford food and the farmers can afford to grow it. It's a classic efficiency versus equity debate.
Remove subsidies, you increase efficiency, save money, but you hurt equity because the poor farmers suffer.
But there is one number in the text, though, that really stood out to me as a failure.
What's that?
By 1990, despite all this growth, despite the Green Revolution, about 65% of the population was still working in agriculture.
65%. Wow. That is the critical failure, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Because in a healthy, developing economy, the standard path is agriculture's share of the workforce shrinks and industries grows. People move from farms to factories.
And that shift just didn't happen fast enough in India.
It didn't. The GDP share of agriculture went down, sure, but the employment share stayed stubbornly high.
Which means more and more people were sharing a smaller and smaller slice of the economic pie.
And the industrial and service sectors just failed to absorb that surplus labor from the villages.
A major, major failure of the 1950-1990 policy.
So we had more food, which is great, but we still had way too many people trying to make a living off the land. Which leads us perfectly to the next sector. Industry.
Yes. Why didn't the factories hire them?
Why didn't we have a manufacturing boom like China or South Korea did later on?
To understand that, we have to look at how we treated industry. Remember, back in the 50s, Indian policymakers just did not trust the private sector to lead the development charge.
And the text gives two big reasons for that distrust.
What are they?
One, private businessmen just didn't have enough capital, enough money to build massive steel plants or dams.
The projects were too big.
And two, even if they did have the money, the market was too small. There wasn't enough demand to make it profitable for them.
Right. So the government decided the state must play the extensive role. And this was all codified in the Industrial Policy Resolution, or IPR, of 1956.
This document, it's often called the economic constitution of that era.
It really was. It laid down all the rules of the game.
And they categorized industries into three buckets, right?
3 schedules. Schedule A. These were the VIPs.
The untouchables for the private sector.
Exactly. Arms, atomic energy, railways, aircraft. These were exclusively owned by the state. No private players allowed, period.
Okay, then there was Schedule B.
In Schedule B, the state would take the lead, but private enterprise could supplement the effort.
So the state is the captain.
And the private sector is the substitute player you bring on in the last 5 minutes. Think fertilizers or mining.
And finally, Schedule C, everything else.
This was left for the private sector.
Well,
But,
right.
and you rightly pointed this out earlier, it's a massive but.
You couldn't just open a factory.
No. You needed a license.
Ah, the infamous license, Raj.
This is where the story gets really frustrating. To open a new industry, to expand your existing one, or even to produce a new type of product in your own factory, you needed written permission from the government.
And this wasn't just like filling out a form online.
Oh God, no. It was a physical file that had to move from desk to desk, department to department, getting stamps from dozens and dozens of bureaucrats.
No, the goal wasn't entirely bad, was it? The text says they wanted to promote regional equality.
That was the stated goal. If you wanted to set up a factory in a backward, underdeveloped area, it was easier to get a license, and you might get some tax breaks.
So they were trying to spread development around the country so that industries didn't just all cluster in Bombay and Calcutta.
A noble intention. But the reality, as the text points out, was completely different.
The system was hijacked.
Totally hijacked.
Yeah.
The big industrial houses, the rich established families, they would just buy up licenses.
But not to build factories.
No, they bought them to prevent their competitors from building factories.
That is wild. So they would hoard licenses just to maintain their monopoly.
Exactly. If I'm the only one making scooters, I'll apply for a new license to make more scooters, get it, and then just sit on it.
So that you can't get a license to enter the market and compete with me.
And I have no competition.
Yeah.
And bureaucracy was just stifling. Entrepreneurs spent more time in Delhi lobbying ministers for a license than they did in their factories thinking about how to make their product better or cheaper.
So we had these big state-owned giants, which were often inefficient. And we had the private sector completely strangled by licenses. But there was a third category the government tried to promote.
Small-scale industries, or SSI?
Yes. The Karve Committee in 1955, It recognized that small industries use more labor than large mechanical ones.
They're labor-intensive.
So to promote employment, that equity goal again, they decided to protect small businesses.
And how did they protect them? By a reservation.
What does that mean in this context?
They basically made a list of products, things like certain garments, stationery, simple goods, and said, only small factories are allowed to make these. Big companies were legally banned from producing them.
So again, this serves the goal of equity and employment. It allowed a lot of small entrepreneurs to survive and create jobs.
But it often came at the cost of efficiency. A small firm might not have the resources to upgrade its technology or lower its costs through economies of scale.
But it didn't matter because they had a captive market. The big guys weren't allowed to compete.
Exactly. And speaking of captive markets, let's talk about trade policy.
Right. If the domestic industry was a walled garden,
Trade policy was the moat filled with alligators.
we call this strategy import substitution.
And the strategy was brutally simple. Make it here, don't buy it from there.
And we use two main tools to enforce this.
Tariffs and quotas.
Okay, let's define those quickly for everyone. A tariff is
A tax on imports. If you want to buy an American car, you have to pay a huge tax on it, which makes it way more expensive than the Indian car.
Okay, and a quota.
A quota is a limit on the quantity. The government would say, we will only allow 500 foreign cars to enter the entire country this year.
So a double lock on the door.
A double lock. And the logic behind all this was the infant industry argument.
The planners argued that Indian industries were like babies.
Exactly. And you can't throw a baby into a wrestling ring with a giant.
And the Western companies, Ford, General Motors, Siemens, they were the giants.
So we needed to protect our baby industries behind a wall of tariffs until they were strong enough to grow up and compete.
It's a sound logic for a temporary period. I mean, every developed nation has done this at some point in its history.
They have. But the problem in India was the baby never grew up.
Why not?
Because it never had to fight. The protection became a permanent crutch.
It got too comfortable in the crib and never learned to walk.
That's a great way to put it. The text gives the example of the car market. We all know the Ambassador and the Fiat. For decades, those were your only choices.
And they didn't really improve, did they?
Why would they? If I'm the only person selling cars, and you're not allowed to buy a Toyota or a Ford because the tariffs are too high, you have to buy my car.
Even if the engine rattles and the AC doesn't work?
I have absolutely no incentive to innovate, to cut my costs, or to improve my quality. The domestic producers had a completely captive market.
So the consumer suffered. We got poor quality goods, often at very high prices.
We saved foreign exchange by not importing, sure, but we stifled our own competitiveness in the process.
Okay, so we've covered agriculture, industry, and trade. Let's step back and look at the scorecard for 1950-1990. It's easy to look back now and criticize everything, but it wasn't all bad, was it?
No, not at all. We have to be fair and look at the context of the time. The achievements were significant.
Let's start with the pros. First, GDP growth.
It wasn't explosive like China's later on, but it was steady, and it was much, much higher than the near-zero growth of the colonial era. We broke the cycle of stagnation. That's a win.
Okay, what's another one?
Second, the industrial base diversified. We weren't just making cotton and jute anymore. By 1990, India was making electronics, engineering goods, chemicals, machine tools. That structural change is a huge win.
Right. Third, food security.
The Green Revolution meant India could feed itself. That is a massive, massive win for national sovereignty.
And fourth, a social one.
Social justice. The abolition of the Zamindari system, however flawed the implementation was a huge step forward for the dignity of millions of people.
Okay, those are some big achievements. But, and there's always a but, we have to talk about the failures, because the bill eventually came due.
The failures became more and more apparent by the 1980s.
What's number one on the list of cons?
Public sector inefficiency. Many of those big state-owned companies, the commanding heights, they turned into giant money pits.
They were overstaffed.
Inefficient, and incurred huge losses that the taxpayer had to cover year after year.
Number two.
The license raj killed entrepreneurship. It rewarded lobbying, not innovation. It created a culture of corruption and delay.
Three. The lack of competition.
Which meant Indian goods were often of poor quality. And as a result, we couldn't export much because, frankly, nobody wanted to buy our outdated products.
Which leads to number four, the export failure.
Because we were so focused on looking inward with import substitution, We completely failed to develop a strong export sector like South Korea or Taiwan did. We just missed the global trade boom.
And you wanted to bring in some linkages here, right? Because our listeners, especially the UPSC aspirants, know that economics doesn't just happen in a vacuum.
Yes. The source material for this deep dive mentioned linkages to environment and history from previous year questions. It's crucial to see the bigger picture.
So how does that fit in?
Well, when we talk about industry and modernization in this chapter, we're really talking about resource usage.
Okay.
For instance, look at this source question about e-waste. It asks, due to improper indiscriminate disposal of old and used computers, which of the following are released into the environment? And it lists things like beryllium, cadmium, chromium, mercury, lead.
That is a very scary list.
And it connects directly to our industrial policy. We pushed for modernization in electronics in the 70s and 80s, but the economic drive for modern goods creates the environmental challenge of e-waste today.
So the policy of 1950 and 1990 was about creating the industry.
And the challenge of the 2020s is managing the waste from that industry, growth versus environment.
Okay, what about the history linkage? One of the source questions asks about rock-cut architecture and the Barabar caves. I mean, what does an ancient cave have to do with the 1950s economy?
It's about what an economy allows a society to build. Economic surplus allows for art and culture. The ancient empires had an economic system that was productive enough to allow them to pay artisans to spend years carving the Ajanta or Barabar caves.
And in the 1950-1990 period, our temples were different.
Exactly. Nehru famously called dams and steel plants the temples of modern India.
I love that connection. The state was the patron of this new kind of architecture, dams and factories, just as the Mauryan emperors were patrons of the caves. The economy funds the culture.
Precisely. Everything connects. But coming back to 1990, the cracks in the system were becoming canyons.
We had a huge fiscal deficit. The government was spending way more than it was earning.
And we had a balance of payments crisis. We were running out of foreign currency.
And since we had closed our doors to the world for so long, we didn't have enough dollars coming in to pay for our essential imports.
Like oil. We were on the verge of defaulting on our loans to the world.
And this crisis is what set the stage for our next deep dive. The economic reforms of 1991. The liberalization, privatization, and globalization LPG reforms that changed absolutely everything.
So to wrap this whole period up, 1950 to 1990 was the era of the foundation.
Yes, it was a period of building the skeleton of the economy. It had serious flaws, inefficiency, bureaucracy, a total lack of competitive spirit. But it kept the house standing.
It did. It ensured we didn't starve, and it ensured we had a domestic industrial base to build upon later.
And we can't judge the policies of the 1950s solely by the standards of the 2020s, can we?
You absolutely cannot. They were solving the problems of their time starvation, zero industry, extreme poverty. But in solving those problems, they created new ones that required a radical course correction.
That is the perfect summary.
Now, I want to leave you and everyone listening with a provocative thought, something the text hints at but leaves open for debate.
Go for it.
We said the mixed economy was supposed to serve the goal of equity. But if the Green Revolution solved hunger, yet left 65% of the people stuck in farming, and industry grew but couldn't hire them because of the license raj and other issues, did the mixed economy actually fail its primary moral goal of equity? Did we just create a different kind of inequality one, where the divide wasn't just rich versus poor, but between the small number of formal sector employees with secure jobs versus the vast majority in the informal sector in agriculture?
That is a heavy question. Because if that structural transformation doesn't happen, if people don't move from the farm to the factory, you get a very specific type of persistent poverty that is incredibly hard to break.
It's definitely something to think about.
For sure. All right, friends, if this deep dive helped you unpack Chapter 2 of Class 11 Economics, do us a favor and smash that like button.
It really helps the channel.
And remember, join the Telegram channel Simplified UPSC by PPP for the free notes and the PYQ breakdown we discussed.
And for the serious learners who want the premium organized notes and model answers, please check out the private library. Keep learning, keep questioning.
And we will see you in the next deep dive where we tackle the big one, 1991.
See you then.